So today's topic will be on cross-account IAM access. To give the context, let's say we have an two account. The account can be of the both account, let's say of your account, maybe a prod and dev, or it can be of a third party where you are giving access to your AWS account so that they can make a couple of calls either to monitor a resource for cost optimization, or a third party deployment part, like where you let resource to get deployed. So there are like a number of ways where you would want to let account A to access account B's permissions, right, or resources. So there would be like multiple ways to achieve this, to let one account to get access to another account. So people would say the generic way would be that you create user in your own account and then share it with the people so that they can log into the account and do it. But for the sharing purpose, or like just to provide access, let's say you have a developer team who needs only read access for the S3 bucket in your prod account, right? Or you have a third party company which would like to monitor your EC2 billing part. So creating an individual user who are out of your organization and sharing the credentials to them just for read access permission or a temporary use case or a specific use case, it's not an optimal way to do it. Why it's not an optimal way to do it? So if you think in terms of personal account, you would go into an individual account, you create a user, and then you provide access to them, right? If you think in terms of organization structure, or even in personal way, you might be go one level above using control tower to manage all your accounts, and you would create users from there. But if you think in terms of organization or enterprise structure, you are going to keep one level above the SSO, we call it as the single sign-on, which would be fetching the details from your Active Directory. So if you are taking a decision for such use cases to provide a developer team to give access to production, or a third party company to provide access to a production account, then if you are taking an approach of like creating individual users, sharing the credentials with them, then you would end up adding the user into the Active Directory and then creating a separate group for them. So it's more of operational overhead, and you need to build the trust policies and getting them bring into your organization structure, which is of like overhead. So what AWS prefers is they have provided you like how you can build a trust policy and how can you provide access to user from account B, and then how can you give a specific permission at granular level so that they can perform any action to the resource at the account A, in our case like prod, and see what resource is there and what action they want to permit without even creating any specific user to do this. So general terminologies you might be knowing. So you have users in the account part, right? And you have groups, and then you have roles, and then you have policies. So the policy is more like a set of instruction, what you say, like what actions should be allowed or what actions should be denied. Roles, you can configure it so that it gives a temporary access whenever a group of people or a specific user assume the specific role. In order to achieve the cross-account permission or cross-account action, we would go with roles, policies, and then we will let a user to assume it in our case or in our demo purpose. You can also map the specific roles to the groups so that whoever the users are part of the specific groups can assume the specific role and get the access to do it. We'll see it in a hands-on part. So for now, you remember like it can be done in 3 simple actions. The entire process can be completed to let from user or any resource from account B to access the resource in account A. It's as simplified as that, just the 3 steps. So step 1, you are going to create a role and a policy where your resources exist. So if I want a person from outside of my organization or from a different account want to read my S3 buckets or read my EC2 on that specific account, I'm going to create a role and a policy with the specific access to it. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I would need to enable a trust policy for the requesting access, or like who would be assessing it. So first step, I create a role and a policy as normal. Second one, I would need to build the trust policy. So in case if prod is an account where I want to let people from dev to access it, I would go into the prod account, I would create a role and policy with permission for letting them to read S3 bucket, and then I would build the trust policy for dev account so that any resource from dev can come and read my prod. And then the third one would be, I go to the end or the requesting part, I would create another role to assume the specific role which is already created. So just 3 steps we can achieve this process. So first step, you go to the main account where your actual resource exists, create a role, give a permission, and second step is to like build the trust policy for the actual requester account. Third one, go to the requester account, create a role, and give permission to assume the specific role which is created in the previous one. Okay, so we'll see it in the hands-on part now. So now we have 4 accounts here. Okay, so what we're going to do is, let's take TechPage as the main prod account and security log as the dev account, and we are going to give a user in the security log to go and read access for the S3 buckets in the TechPage account. So to prove that we are working in a proper way, so first I will log into the administrator access as part of the TechPage, which in case of prod account, and let's see the S3 buckets listed. Why I'm taking S3 bucket? Because the S3 buckets names are unified, which means it can exist only in one account. If the S3 buckets are visible in the another account B, which means we are proving that the end user got access to the specific resources, so that I can't create duplicate resource in account B and say that, hey, this person got access. So that's why I choose an S3 as the example. So now let's navigate to the another account of security log, and if I visit S3, and buckets, you see there is no bucket exists in the specific account, and so S3 is a global one, so it doesn't matter like which region you are listing it down, it should be visible. Okay, so what we are going to do is, let's go to the step 1. So what is step 1? I need to create a role and policy where the resource exists. So where our resource exists in the user account called TechPage. So I'm in the TechPage account, so you see that 853357 it begins with. You can confirm 853357 and go to the IAM, and you would need to create a role and the policy. So once you move it to the role, you can see a create role option over there. I will go a bit zoomed in. Create role option is there. So the role can be mapped to, you can map it to a separate identity like of users, or you can map it to a web identity, like if people are logging via Google or Cognito for your account, then you can do it in that way. You can also map it to services, like for example, a Lambda is going to access an S3 bucket, or an EC2 bucket is going to do an S3 API calls. You would go with AWS services specific one. But irrespective of the scenario, either an S3 bucket is going to do an API call to the another account to fetch the S3 details, or an end user is going to make an API call to fetch the S3 user. Irrespective of the case, what we want to do is, you go to the AWS account specific part, and here you would see what account you want to provide the role is for, right? So by default, it's of your own account or the current account where you exist. But what we want to do is, we want to provide access to the account B or the dev account. In our case, this would be the account we would need to do it. So I provide another user account and I provide the account number. So if you want to provide user for an end user for an as a console login, then don't choose require external ID. Whereas if you're going to do it via API calls, the person is not going to log in via console, but just going via API calls, then you can use external ID, because via API, the STS based of assume role, you can pass the external ID value, whereas as a console via switching role, you can't pass that. So for our demo, for simplistic purpose, I will go with user based purpose. I'm not selecting the require external ID approach. And if I go next, here you can choose what are the permissions you want to map it. So I want to provide them read access for the S3 buckets. So I'll do this. Maybe I can also provide a EC2 read access for it. Okay. So if I do next, now you can see 2 things I have created as part of it. So one, for the role we are creating the policy, which is AWS managed policy of one for providing the read access for all the EC2 resources, and read access for all the S3 bucket has been mapped. On top of it, we are also establishing a trust policy. And in trust policy, what we are saying, when we say principal AWS, which means any specific resource from the account 8631480, we let them to assume this specific role. So that's what this trust policy, we are establishing a trust connection between account A and account B. So if you see, this account number is same as of our security log account. So here you can provide a role name. So let's say I give it as S3 prod role, and for developer read access. So I'm creating a trust, I'm creating a policy. If you want to track the resource or purpose, you can keep like add some valuable tag to it. So a role has been created. What is the role? S3-prod role, and you would need to note the ARN of this role. Okay, so let me note down the ARN here. This would be the role ARN which we created in the prod, also known as the tech page in our case. So what we are going to do, we have done two steps, right? One, we created a role and policy, then we created the trust policy as part of it. So next thing what you're going to do is, you're going to switch to another account, and then we're going to create a role to let it assume this specific role. Okay, how to do that? I'm going to log in as security log, and I would navigate to IAM, roles, create role, same process. Now to be clarified, I'm in the developer account or the security account. I'm not in the prod account. You can compare it with the number. It ends with 5480, which is a security log account. Okay, so if you're working in multiple accounts in the same tab, be cautious like which account you are in. So now the part comes like what kind of role you want to create it, right? Either you want to do with AWS service or AWS account scenario. So here the scenario would vary, like what you're going to choose. If your use case is like an EC2 from this specific account is going to create or like access the another resource, then you would go with AWS service specific access. If you're going to map this to either of groups or to the roles, you would go with AWS account specific one. So in my case, I'm going to map it to a separate user so that I can log in as a console and try it out. So I'll go with AWS account, and I'm not going to let anyone else to assume this from the another account. So I will keep same as of this account, and you go next, and here you would need to map the policy. For now, I'll go next, and here you see trust policy has been there, right? And here you are saying that of the same account. So this role is for the same account. So what we want to do here is we want to add a permission. Okay, so let's add a permission. I would do and create a policy before mapping this role. Let's create a policy. So I'll create a custom policy, and it's asked for like service and stuff. I'll go with JSON for simplistic purpose, and all I'm going to do is I would need to let people to allow. The condition statement says I'm letting it to assume the role for the resource or for the role which we have in place. In our case, it would be this. So this role is nothing but the same which we created in the production account, right? So I just copied this, and I'm adding a permission set now for letting this policy to assume this specific role. So I'll give prod dev and maybe read access for developer S3 buckets in prod account, and I'll just create the policy. So now the policy has been created, right? So this is our policy. So now we can go to a role, create a role, go with next. Now we can check with the policy which we already created, map it to that role, and say prod dev S3 read, and just create a role. Okay, so now what we have done, we have created a role and gave specific permission for the resource to assume another role. So if you ask like, is this done? It's all we need. We want to give the permission to the specific user or a specific one. So for demo purpose, what I will do, I'll create a user. Let's keep it as cross S3, or maybe to make it dramatic, I'll keep it as developer A, and I will provide a user access, auto-generated password. I would set this as no. Add user to group or attach directly. So for now, I'll attach directly, and the policy or the role we created this one, and go next. You create a user. So now it would give us a console password. I just copy this and let me store it in some other place. Okay, and the username would be developer A, right? So now this is a console sign in URL. What I can do, I go here and let me log in as the user, the password which I fetch from the console. So now what I'm doing is I'm going to log in as a user in this specific account. So the account exists in the dev and I'm logging in this dev account, okay, not in the production account. So since we're dealing with two different accounts, you need to be like a bit cautious and understand the concept, like where the policy, where the role is created and which account credentials we're using it. So now what we're going to do, I'll go and see S3 bucket, and you see you don't have permission to the list, because by default for any user the permission would be deny permission, right? Then you can ask me like, how can I view it? So then what you want to do is you want to let this user to assume a role which we created in the another account. So to do that, you don't need to go into the production account and log in. You go switch role, a screen pops up. Now it asks for the account ID. Provide the account ID of your production one. So you can see the account ID of production one here. In our case 85331 is the account ID. Provide that, and then it asks for the role name. So role name is again the role which you created in the production account, not the role name which you created in the dev account. So the role name would be this. Display name, you can provide it as like develop or something. It's just for display purpose, nothing fancy over there. So now you can switch role. Now you see I am still in developer account. 8533 is a developer account, and all the resources of S3 bucket gets listed here. So now I have the read permission to read all the S3 bucket that belongs into the production account. So same thing you would do in terms of creating a role, or like if you want to access EC2 or Lambda to call the resource from the another account. At the role permission creation, rather than creating an account based role, you would create a service based role, and then you will be giving the role to assume the another role from there. Okay, try to pause and watch this video, like if you get confused which account, which user, and how the role assumption is done, try to take a note of it. Try to track what account number we are using in each step. That will give you clarity. I will repeat in 3 steps, right? So one, in prod account you create, or the main account where your resource exists, you will be creating a role with a policy for what all permissions will be assessed for a specific account ID, like from which account the API calls can happen. The step 2 would be like you go to the another account from where the user actually exists, create a role and map it to the user with the policy permission just to assume the role over here. Then from the same account, switch role, give the account ID of the account where the resources exist plus the role name where the resources exist, and then you assume it. Okay, so purposefully created 2 different names for role in each steps, and the account ID is different. So that's I wanted to cover in terms of like best practices, rather creating an individual user and sharing the credentials with third party or the other account. You can have a same resource exists at the same place, and you can just provide the granular level access to achieve the cross account security part. Okay, so that's mostly for today. Any specific doubts, any questions?